My life is not too much different than maybe some of y'all in this room. Been married for 27 years now to my wife, Misty, and I have 3 wonderful daughters. That's my family. But to go back a little bit, I was born actually in Brooklyn, New York, to Brazilian immigrants. My father moved from New York when I was born because he had a bout with asthma and wanted a warmer climate. And so they moved to New Orleans, where I was raised. My dad was an interesting man. He came from pretty much a cowboy past in Brazil. My grandfather, his dad, was a rancher and was known for having a bad temper, and was a drinker, a brawler, and a womanizer. And it finally caught up with him. And my grandfather wound up getting diseased and become an invalid for 12 years and then passed away, leaving my father and his 2 older siblings to raise 14 of their brothers and sisters. It led to a life of poverty and also pain. My father had an aptitude for language, learned to speak languages quickly, and one of those was English. And during the war at that time, the American soldiers were stationed in Brazil. My dad got to know a few of them, and through that relationship and learning English and helping them get around, my father was introduced into the merchant marines, where he was able to get on a ship and get to America. After he established himself in America, he came back and got my mother, who was 19, who barely had an education of her own because she had to help her mother, my grandmother, who was a landlord in the slums. And so my mother at 19 moved to America with my father, and right away had 4 children. Then at 30 had me, and then they moved to New Orleans, where I was raised. I was a skinny kid, was small in stature, and was diagnosed with a learning disability at a young age that they didn't know really what to do about it. A lot of it was because I had a lot of ear infections and missed a whole lot of schooling. And so it caused a frustration right away with me in school, because I was always behind. I was always struggling to catch up with everybody and to keep up with everybody. It's probably why sports became kind of my outlet, because in sports, I shined. In sports, I felt like somebody. In sports, I succeeded. And one particular sport really took my interest, and it was weightlifting. I was given a book of a man named Arnold Schwarzenegger. And when I saw his physique, I knew that that was something I wanted to do. And I was inspired by a coach who really encouraged me. He saw that I had a lot of discipline and strength in a natural way. And so he started to encourage me. And at 12, I began my bodybuilding determination to become a professional bodybuilder. And I started working out hard. Probably 2 reasons: to improve my stature, but also probably subconsciously to protect my mom. Because though my father was raised in Brazil, came to America, a better life, he still carried a lot of what my grandfather was like. He became a drinker and a brawler and had a temper and would go into fits of rage and often would take it out on my mother and us children. And so weightlifting became a way that I knew I could protect my mother and my siblings. And those days came where I had to do that. And it caused a real rift between my dad and I. We wasn't overly religious as a family. We were Catholics, but we wasn't really committed. My mother was very committed. I would go often with her. My father hardly would go to church. It wasn't until my senior year in high school that I started to compete at a high level. I started winning competitions locally, won my own high school, Mr. Bonnable. That was a big experience for me. And then I went on to represent Louisiana after I won Teenage Louisiana at the Mr. America, and did well. Was a finalist at the Mr. America, won Teenage America the year before, went to the USA and placed high in the USA, was second in my weight class. And there's when my career exploded. I married my high school sweetheart. We moved to Venice Beach, California, where the mecca of bodybuilding was at the time, where Arnold Schwarzenegger and Lou Ferrigno, all those guys were discovered and where they trained. And I began my drive for the professional ranks of bodybuilding. Within a few months, I was on almost every cover they had of bodybuilding, and my career exploded. Of course, my father's ways and my grandfather's ways caught up with me. The success without integrity, the success without character, it didn't last. I began to womanize, I began to drink, I began to hang out with the wrong crowd, and of course the temper and the fits of rage started to take over me, and I found myself in a situation that I did not really like. And my wife finally had enough of my infidelity. She had enough of my attitude and my temper, and she left. And one day I found myself walking on the beach of Venice, a place I always dreamed of living, the career I always dreamed of wanting. And I remember falling on my knees and crying out to God in a way that I don't think I ever cried out. I had experienced something in 1984 with an evangelist named Jesse Duplantis. And I had walked up to the front of the church and I had committed my life to Christ, but I never really got plugged in. I never really got involved in church. No one discipled me. I just went there every once in a while. But I remembered there was something really real about that moment. And on that beach, broken, weeping, and on my knees, I cried out to God that I never really knew. And I said, Father, I need you. All my life, I've been trying to be a champion for this world, and I don't like the champion that I've become. I'm not a champion at all. I've failed you. I've failed my wife. I've failed my family, my friends. I've failed me. And I want to be a champion for you. And I remember in that moment that something changed. I remember in that moment that it wasn't a religion anymore. It was a relationship I was crying out. And that for the first time in my life, I asked God for his will and not my will. And I said, God, if you will put my life back together, I dedicate the rest of my life to you, to being a champion for you and for raising champions for you. And when I stood up, I was different. That was in 1986. I remember leaving shortly after that. God put in my heart to leave California and move back to Louisiana, where I got involved in that church where I first walked up to the altar and gave and committed my life to Christ. And I got a hold of a youth pastor who was an uncompromising Christian, who was full of life, full of excitement. And he had long hair and had tattoos and earrings. He was just the coolest Christian I ever knew. And he took a hold of me and discipled me, taught me how to pray, taught me how to read the Bible, gave me a love for the Bible, and taught me how to witness Christ to the lost. And we would go to Mardi Gras and we would witness, and we'd go to high schools and we would witness, and we would win hundreds of people to the Lord. And then through that relationship, I was introduced to the Power Team, which was a group of athletes who used their physical strength to preach the gospel and travel around the world. And I was recruited by them, and I traveled with them for several years. And then I went on with Strike Force, another team that was ran by a man named Keith Craft. And through Keith Craft, I met my wife, Misty, who I'm married to today. And he discipled me, and he took me to another level of ministry. And then soon after that, I started my own team called the Conquerors. And we traveled all over the world, 32 nations, over 1 million people that we ministered the gospel to. And then in 1998, I felt God calling me to move to Grand Rapids, Michigan, where I got involved in a large church there called Resurrection Life, and a pastor named Dwayne Vanderclock who led it. And there, while I was there for 6 months, we had just moved there, the enemy came for my life, and I was involved in an automobile accident that took my life. Yeah. I was dead at the scene after an 18-wheeler hit us at over 70 miles an hour. I say us, I had a friend in the car with me. And both of us, after the accident, I was flatlined at the scene, and a paramedic who was off duty resuscitated me, which was a miracle in itself that he was there. And then my friend went into a coma for 14 days. 14 days later, he came out of his coma, and 12 days later, I walked out of that hospital after sustaining a broken neck and a broken back, and doctors who said I would never walk again. Rehab for 3 months, and then I was back on my feet and traveling and moving. To every doctor surprised that I made it through that. They could not believe what had happened. They said it was my athletic ability. I say it was God, and I know it's God to this day. But from there, our ministry launched around the world even further. And so, man, that's my story. My story is a little skinny guy from Louisiana who decided to give his life to Christ, who started following the wrong path, but then God got a hold of me, and he's an amazing God. If he can do what he did with me, I know he can do what he wants to do in you.